So a lot of people have been using reflection because they think it's a good alternative to making version independence for NMS code, but the thing is that there is a few issues involving it. Mainly, what a lot of people think would be a permanent solution to this is to use placeholders in their strings when they're looking at packages, but of course this is looked down upon by people like MD5 and a few advocates in the community, but there's also some issues with the reflection performance in some people's eyes. I mean, a lot of people would say that this isn't a big deal, but of course, some people have noted, like in the Stack Overflow case, there is about a 300 millisecond difference in the time that is used for reflection. So one really good alternative that I found, and I'm sure a lot of people have found is a good idea, is using abstraction, which is basically using an interface or interface methods that have abstract methods um, to call these NMS pieces of code. So whenever you're doing an abstract method, basically what you're doing is you're having this class that shows you the method. Like whenever you have the class, you call the method, but it's not really calling the main interface class that you started with. If you're instantiating it differently, it'll be calling the class that's implementing that interface instead, which is why it's called abstraction for the most part. There are a few tutorials on this, I think. Yeah, there's one from M. Baxter and J. Flory that I put down, and both of these are pretty good tech tutorials. The one that I would recommend is J. Flory's because you don't really need to use Maven for this. I mean, you can use Maven, but it's not really needed. So if you wanted to read a text tutorial, there is one from J. Flory on Spigot forums. Alright, so to accomplish this, what we're going to do is in some package, I just call it compatibility, you're going to make all of these version classes that are going to be implementing this interface right here. The methods that you're putting in this interface don't really have to be like mine. I'm just having one because I'm not really doing much with this, but there can be multiple interfaces that are having multiple methods and stuff like that. That's basically what an interface is for. So you're not really limited to what you're doing or what I'm doing here. So you can see here I have a 1.7 package just to organize these. And none of these are implementing this yet. So I'm just going to go in and implement the version handler. And you're going to see once I do this, it's going to have error. That's because we're not implementing the methods in this interface here. And pretty much everything that we do in this method right here uh, will be called by this. That's pretty much the entire point of the interface, is to um, just have a method that you can have, and then other classes implementing that method or the interface, and then be able to call that method from anywhere and have it run code depending on what class it is. So whenever we start up the server, we're going to have an instance of this version handler. And what we're going to do is set this up by getting their server version. Whoops. Okay, so we're going to have to get their server version from the Bukkit package, which is bukkit.getServer, not server ID, get package, wait no, get class, my bad, get package, and the get name. And then you don't have to do this like I am, but it's a little bit easier to read in the end. You just substring the version, version last index of, and then char dot. So basically this is taking the package, which would be something like net Minecraft server, and then 1.7 r1, and it's getting the last index of this dot. So pretty much is just transforming that to this. And then we're going to have a switch case or switch statement for this because it's a little bit easier to read. It's pretty much the same thing as a if statement anyways, but we want to do this for readability. And you can also have a boolean for whether or not it's valid, just so you can tell the server owner if they have a valid version, and then they'll know why their plugin's not working. I'm going to go ahead and go through and implement this method in all these classes, and then we're going to actually write out the NMS code for all these classes just in a little bit. Okay, so of course what we're going to have to do is, since this is version 1.7R1, we're going to set our version handler to a new instance of that version. This is pretty important that you make sure that you don't put the wrong version, because if you do put the wrong version, it's going to be calling NMS code for the wrong server version. You'd have to repeat this for pretty much every single case that you are supporting. And of course, you don't have to do what I'm doing with just 1.7 to 1.8. You can go all the way to 1.9. In some cases, you're restricted to what versions you're able to do because of some NMS methods not being supported all the way back to 1.7 and etc. So you have to be kind of wise with what things you choose to do. And some of them can be optional code, like you can, like for a glowing entity at 1.9, you can have that optional piece of code, and you can just have it not run if you are not using if the person's not using the right version. Okay, so I typed all this out, and as you can see, I changed the is valid to true, so it's a default of true. And if none of these are called, it's just going to go to the default case and set is valid to false. So if there's an error, you can say if is not valid. You can just send something to console and close the plugin. I believe that's bukkit.get plugin. My bad. It's disable plugin and then the Java plugin instance of your plugin. So if it's just not working, you can go tell the server this version is not supported. I cannot type today because I'm looking up at my TV. So pretty much all of this code is done. Of course, you might have tons more cases than I do. You don't have to put it in the main class. Is this what matters in the end? Is that this version handler interface has an instance to call the method on, and once you get that, everything will be fine. But now we're going to start doing the fun part of writing out our NMS code. What I decided to do for this is to make a simple thing that makes the entity follow the player. So we'll be using craft entity and get handle, I think. Make sure you import the right ones, because if you don't, you're going to scoot over. And what's really interesting about this too is if you imported, for example, this is OBC code, not net Minecraft code, because you can see OBC. But if you put this in this class, it would pretty much die right away because that package does not exist for that server. But since it's an interface, it's not going to be checking if this exists or not. But so all these code, all these classes down here, they will not be messed with whenever they're not loaded at all. So pretty much this will not cause an error whenever you're importing this, and that's why interfaces are pretty nice, because you don't have to worry about any issues that will arise whenever you're importing things. You just have to make sure that you import them to the right classes, and then everything will be fine. And what is this method? If it will let me do anything. And we'll just go ahead and change this location to here. And basically what this is doing is it's making the entity try walking to this area. So this is something that you could not do with regular Bukkit API code. Of course, if you could do with Bukkit API code, you would not be using NMS. You pretty much don't want to use NMS in most cases unless you want to have different performance. I don't know if NMS is faster or not. I think it is in some cases. But really the only reason why we have to do this is because navigation is very you know, very unstable with API. Like you can't set targets or anything like that like you would with normal Bukkit API because it bugs out a lot. So all I have to do is paste this code for the most part. It depends on what you're doing. Sometimes the code will change, but luckily for this, nothing really changes in between each version. At least I haven't checked each version. Each of these has their own imports for the most part, except it seems to be importing the wrong one. Yeah, so make sure you always get the right imports for your classes, or you're not gonna have some errors. Okay, so we've now imported all these correctly. So whenever these classes are being called, they will not call the wrong class for the most part. And pretty much everything we're doing is about done. A lot of this code that I'm doing is like not really important to you, but I'm just showing it in example. So we'll do location, get world, if it'll let me. Oh yeah, my bad. It's very hard to type because I'm looking up at my second monitor and it's like very high up. Yeah, let me just go and make a variable for this. Okay, so you can see that this method is deprecated, but we're not too worried about that. It's not a big deal. And basically all we need to do is call our version handler. This is like pretty useless code, but we're still going to use it. So as you can see, you don't have to have a reference to this. Actually, you can just cut this out. And if you wanted to, I can show you a quick example of this. If we wanted to keep referring to the same wolf, all we have to do is have some, if you're having a bunch of pets around the world, then you'd have to have some collection to hold all these, or you can just store this UUID of the pet locally. So just for this example, we can just do private string UUID, and we can store it. So let me go ahead and move that back, because we're now going to make the entity dependent on whether or not it is a null variable at top, or if it's going to be a new entity that we haven't spawned yet. So if this is null, which is null by default, we just go ahead and start that. I'm not sure why it got rid of entity type. And then UID is equal to the entity, and then get their unique ID, toString. I usually do toString. I don't know if most people do this, but normally it's fine to do this because they're a little bit less, I don't know, like it just feels better to work with strings because they're not actual, big objects. They're just what would you call it? A primitive object. And for this, we'd have to actually loop through the world entities. So entity, location, get world, get entities. I'm just gonna name it the E. So this is actually really simple for the most part. It's just I'm trying to show you an example of how we can manage these entities if you needed to, and it's not really liking this. Yeah, it wants me to set it to null. Well, actually, yeah, for the most part that should be working. I'm gonna go ahead and run it on the server to show you guys how it looks. Okay, so now that we have this on the server, we can type in /test, and you can see this wolf will spawn next to us, and he won't follow us yet. And if we type /test, it'll go ahead and follow us every single time we type it. So our version is 1.7 R4, so of course this will be supported, but for someone who has like 1.8 R4, if that even exists, then they won't actually be able to use this at all. But otherwise it works great for all versions, and it's usually very fast compared to reflection, and also you don't really need to use reflection for something as simple as this. I wonder if that'll butcher him. Okay, no. Okay. He still wants to follow us, though. So yeah, that's a very simple example of interface reflection or abstraction, or not interface reflection, abstraction with NMS. This will work for the most part. You don't really have to do this if you think that reflection will be better, but in most cases reflection isn't really needed because there's always an alternative to it. But of course in other cases reflection is needed because you might have to access private fields or something like that. It just will cause more overhead because the JVM can't optimize that at all. So should be fine, but this is usually a good route to take, and also looks very clean for the most part as well.
Backs up the pack from the snow, pass them around in my own UFO. Hey, just for the record, you're old. My team on the record, our aura is gold.